You know that moment in a superhero movie when the villain finally gets what's coming to them? That exact instant where the music swells, the audience cheers, and years of cruelty, arrogance, and chaos finally crash down on the person who deserved it most? That's what we're diving into today. The most satisfying villain deaths in superhero movie history. Not just the flashy ones, but the ones that felt earned. The ones that made us lean back in our seats and whisper, "Finally." Let's start where comic book movies truly learned how to make us feel justice, with Thanos. For a decade, the Marvel Cinematic Universe built him up as the ultimate threat. The Mad Titan who snapped half of existence away like it was nothing. And in Avengers Endgame, when Iron Man whispered those immortal words, "And I am Iron Man," and turned the power of the Infinity Stones against Thanos, we witnessed poetic symmetry. The man who believed he was inevitable was erased by the one who embodied self-sacrifice. It wasn't just a death, it was cosmic balance. The most satisfying part? Thanos didn't die screaming. He just accepted defeat. A single look of disbelief as his empire of ash drifted away. Now jump from the galactic scale to something darker and grittier. Spider-Man 2's Dr. Octopus. Alfred Molina gave us one of the most human villains in superhero cinema, a man who lost his mind to his own invention. But when he regained control and chose to drown his machine to save the city, it wasn't Spider-Man who defeated him. It was Otto Octavius reclaiming his humanity. His final words, "I will not die a monster," still hit hard. Because the best villain deaths don't come from revenge. They come from redemption. On the other hand, some villains deserve zero sympathy. Enter Green Goblin from Sam Raimi's Spider-Man. Willem Dafoe's performance was pure chaos, manic laughter, twisted morality, and enough menace to terrify an entire generation. When his own glider impales him at the end, it's the ultimate irony. He's undone by his own obsession with power. That moment, the brief flicker of realization in his eyes before impact, that's cinematic karma at its finest. Speaking of karmic justice, X-Men. First Class gave us Sebastian Shaw's death at the hands of Magneto. After torturing young Eric Lensher and murdering his mother, Shaw created the very monster who would end him. The image of Magneto turning the Nazi coin through Shaw's skull, slow, deliberate, inevitable, is pure storytelling poetry. No over-the-top explosion, no witty one-liner. Just quiet, cold vengeance. You could feel decades of pain and rage distilled into a single moment. And then, there's Harvey Dent from The Dark Knight. His fall from Gotham's White Knight to the scarred Two-Face remains one of the most tragic arcs in superhero history. His death wasn't triumphant, it was necessary. Batman's decision to take the blame to preserve Gotham's hope turned Dent's end into a philosophical gut punch. In Nolan's world, villainy isn't always born of evil. Sometimes it's born of broken ideals. Let's shift gears to something gloriously unhinged. Deadpool. Ajax, or Francis, wasn't a world-ending villain, but he was cruel in ways that felt personal. He tortured Wade Wilson, left him for dead, and mocked his pain. So when Deadpool finally shot him in the head, ignoring Colossus's lecture about being a hero, it was perfectly Deadpool. The audience didn't need a moral lesson. We needed that release, and it delivered. And speaking of release, few scenes made audiences explode quite like Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, when Yondu sacrifices himself to save Peter Quill and finally earns his redemption. Now technically, Ego the Living Planet's destruction was the villain's death, but Yondu's farewell gave it weight. Ego's god complex crumbled under the combined strength of family and defiance. When Peter says goodbye to his real father figure, the satisfaction doesn't come from the explosion. It comes from the emotional closure that follows. Now, let's talk about Killmonger. In Black Panther, Eric Killmonger was never just a villain. He was a reflection of the pain and anger buried in Wakanda's history. His death scene is iconic because it's not about defeat. It's about conviction. Bury me in the ocean with my ancestors who jumped from ships because they knew death was better than bondage. That line turned his final breath into a statement. It was defiance wrapped in tragedy, and that's why it lingers. And what about Zod in Man of Steel? His death remains one of the most divisive moments in superhero cinema. When Superman snaps his neck, you can see every ounce of conflict on Henry Cavill's face. It's the moment he realizes what it means to protect humanity, the unbearable cost of being its savior. For once, killing wasn't a power fantasy. It was a burden. That scream afterward wasn't victory. It was horror. Then there's the Joker in Batman, 1989. Jack Nicholson's theatrical villain met his end hanging from a helicopter ladder, laughing to the very last second before falling to his death, with that eerie laugh still echoing from his broken body. The moment encapsulated Joker's insanity perfectly. He didn't die defeated. He died entertained. Now, not every satisfying villain death needs to be dramatic or symbolic. Sometimes it's just plain cathartic. Think about Obadiah Stane in Iron Man, the first MCU villain to go down in flames, literally, after being exposed for greed and betrayal. When his armor overloads and explodes, it's a full circle moment for Tony Stark. The student surpasses the master, the manipulator gets out-engineered, and the old world of weapons gives way to the age of heroes. And of course, one can't forget the Winter Soldier's apparent demise of Alexander Pierce. Robert Redford's cold, calculating villain met poetic justice when Nick Fury shot him mid-sentence. "Hail Hydra," he gasps, and Fury coldly replies, "No. You're out of bullets. Simple, effective, done." Then there's the Penguin from Tim Burton's Batman Returns. Danny DeVito's grotesque, tragic villain dies surrounded by his beloved penguins, a bizarre yet oddly moving moment. It's grotesque theater, the kind of macabre fairy tale that only Burton could pull off. The way the camera lingers, the somber music, it's both absurd and sad, giving us pity and satisfaction in equal measure. Let's talk about Mysterio in Spider-Man: Far From Home. This one felt especially satisfying because of the deception involved. Quentin Beck built his entire persona on lies and manipulation, using illusion to control others. So when those illusions turned on him, when his final trick failed and his truths were exposed, his end felt like poetic irony. The liar couldn't control reality anymore. But few deaths hit as cathartic as Loki's. And yes, I mean the Infinity War version. For years, Loki danced between villain and anti-hero, betrayal and redemption. When Thanos choked the life out of him, it wasn't just about power. It was a brutal reminder that even tricksters can't outsmart death forever. But Loki's defiant last words, "You will never be a god," gave him something Thanos never had: dignity. Sometimes satisfaction doesn't come from victory. It comes from justice catching up. Take Red Skull from Captain America, the first Avenger. Obsessed with harnessing cosmic power, he literally got what he wanted, and it consumed him. The Tesseract blasting him into another dimension wasn't just a defeat, it was poetic punishment. He reached for godhood and became a ghost. And then there's Hela in Thor, Ragnarok. The goddess of death consumed by the very force she thought she controlled. The reawakening of Surtur. Watching her stand defiant, knowing she's about to be obliterated by the apocalypse she unleashed, was the perfect ending for a character built on arrogance. "I'm not for you," she says, and she's right. Only fire could end her reign. Jump to The Dark Knight Rises, where Bane's abrupt, explosive exit at the hands of Catwoman may have been brief, but it was undeniably satisfying. After 2.5 hours of watching Gotham bend under his rule, one clean missile blast and a smirk later, poetic justice was served. Sometimes the audience just needs that snap back to balance. But let's rewind for a moment to one of the most emotionally raw scenes ever in a superhero film, Logan. Donald Pierce's death is grim, quick, and brutal, but it's not the spectacle that hits hard. It's the exhaustion behind it. By that point, every death in the movie feels like a sigh from a dying world. Pierce's end is just another domino falling, and that's the point. Some villains don't deserve drama, they deserve silence. And that brings us to perhaps the most layered of them all, Killmonger, whose death, even years later, defines how far superhero storytelling has come. Not every villain dies defeated, some die understood. Each of these endings shares one thread: closure. Whether it's redemption, irony, or karma, The most satisfying villain deaths give us emotional equilibrium. The hero grows. The world heals. The audience breathes again. Because these deaths aren't just about spectacle, they're about storytelling justice. A well-crafted villain death reminds us that even in worlds of gods and monsters, actions have consequences. But before we wrap this up, let's dive even deeper. Because some villain deaths don't just end a movie. They define it. They become the reason we remember it. These moments live rent-free in our minds, not because of how flashy they are, but because of the sheer emotional and moral weight behind them. Think about Killmonger's final moment in Black Panther. This isn't your typical good versus evil ending. Killmonger isn't some random conqueror. He's a broken product of injustice, abandoned by his people and consumed by vengeance. When T'Challa finally defeats him, it's not triumph. It's tragedy. "Bury me in the ocean with my ancestors who jumped from ships," he says, "'cause they knew death was better than bondage." That single line? It shook the theater. Killmonger dies standing by his convictions, and his death changes Wakanda forever. That's what makes it satisfying. It's meaningful, not just explosive. Now, swinging to the darker side, some villain deaths are poetic justice in the purest form. Harvey Dent, for example. In The Dark Knight, Dent's fall from grace is one of the most gut-wrenching transformations ever put on screen. His death at the end isn't about revenge, it's about preserving hope. Batman takes the blame, becoming the villain so Gotham can keep its White Knight. It's sacrifice disguised as defeat, and it changed the very definition of what a hero story could be. But not every satisfying villain death has to be emotional or tragic. Some are just downright cool. Like when Loki gets slammed again and again by the Hulk in the Avengers. That one moment of brutal slapstick satisfaction became a meme that lives forever. Talk about karma coming full circle. And maybe that's why we keep rewatching them. Because deep down, in the midst of explosions and cosmic power battles, they give us something real. The comfort of balance. The idea that evil, no matter how powerful, always meets its match, sometimes in the quietest, most poetic ways imaginable. So next time you sit through a superhero showdown, pay attention to that last moment. The villain's expression, the pause before impact, the silence after. That's where the real storytelling magic lives. And that's the beauty of superhero cinema. It doesn't just show us victory, it shows us justice.